crystal chandeliers of Bellamy's fractured warm gold across marble floors that swallowed footsteps, casting the richest patrons in a glow they believed was earned. Serena Vale sat frozen in quiet elegance, her black dress a second skin of controlled power, one hand anchored on Mia's shoulder like a promise to keep the night from unraveling. Across the room near the service window where the heat of the kitchen met the cold of the dining room, a man in a faded gray shirt moved with patient precision, cutting spaghetti into tiny bite-sized pieces for his son. Leon Carter's name tag trembled slightly against the fabric of his shirt, barely visible, as if the restaurant itself refused to acknowledge the quiet strength behind it. Noah Carter's laughter rang out every time the fork grazed his cheek, a sound so pure it made Mia's fingers twitch toward the empty seat beside him. "Mia, stop looking," Serena murmured, her voice a blade sheathed in silk, but her daughter's gaze had already pierced the illusion of the room. "I'm not looking," Mia whispered, her eyes locked on the way Leon leaned in to speak to Noah, as if the words were the only thing in the world that mattered. "You are," Serena corrected softly, her thumb pressing into Mia's shoulder just enough to remind her of the boundaries of wealth and power that defined their world. Mia pointed not at the worn fabric of Leon's shirt, but at the way his body curved protectively around his son, at the unspoken vow in every deliberate motion. "Mom, he talks to him like he matters," Mia said, and the words struck Serena like a physical blow, shattering the carefully constructed armor of her reputation. Her phone vibrated against the tablecloth, a silent siren from her chief of staff. Another leak, another headline branding her too cold to lead, another crisis that demanded her undivided attention. Serena swirled the truffle risotto on her plate, the creamy arborio rice, and shaved truffle an expensive performance of control, while her pulse betrayed the exhaustion beneath the polished surface. Then Mia asked the question that rewrote the night's script forever. "Can we sit with them?" Serena almost refused, her reflex honed by years of calculating every move, but Mia's face held something she hadn't seen in months, raw, unfiltered curiosity, the kind that dissolves the lies we tell ourselves to survive. She rose, her heels a whisper against the marble, and crossed the room where time seemed to slow, where every step felt like a surrender to something she couldn't name. Leon looked up as they approached, not with deference or fear, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had long since stopped shrinking for anyone. Up close, his face was a landscape of hard-won lessons, sharp cheekbones, a jawline carved by responsibility, eyes that had seen too much to flinch at wealth or judgment. "Mia wants to know if she can sit with your son," Serena said, her voice steady despite the storm inside, the words slipping out like a dare. Leon glanced at Noah, who was already half out of his chair, hair falling into his eyes like a flag of excitement, and said, "Sure, if he wants." Noah's grin split his face, his scuffed sneakers scraping the floor, as he wriggled into the seat beside Mia, designer and dirt meeting without judgment. The children spoke in rapid, overlapping sentences, favorite cartoons, school stories, the absurd pride of whose shoes were better, while the world around them weighed the cost of their joy. A woman with a diamond bracelet curled her lip, the sound of her disdain so sharp it could have cut the truffle risotto into thinner pieces than Leon's spaghetti. The waiter arrived, his uniform crisp but his eyes flicking over Leon like a scanner, assessing whether he belonged in the same room as the crystal chandeliers. "Are you ready to order something affordable?" he asked, the words dripping with a kind of condescension that makes wealth feel like a weapon. Leon's voice remained level, a calm sea beneath the waiter's storm. "We're fine." Mia looked up from her menu, her designer sneakers tapping the floor in irritation, and frowned. "Why did he say it like that?" she asked, loud enough for 2 tables to hear, her voice the first honest thing in the room. Silence spread like spilled wine, thick and embarrassing, and Serena felt the heat of it first as shame, then as fury. She had spent a lifetime winning rooms like this, and her daughter had just dismantled one with a child's question. Leon ordered the cheapest dish on the menu, the price so low it made Serena's stomach twist, and she noticed before he did the way his hands, scarred and capable, rested steady on the table. Noah asked for his steak to be cut the same way Leon had sliced the spaghetti, and Leon complied without thinking, his movements gentle and exact, the kind of care that doesn't need an audience. Serena watched his hands, tracing the lines of old wounds, the calluses that spoke of years of work, fixing, carrying, steadying, hands that looked familiar in a way she couldn't place. Then the waiter returned, his smile tighter than a drum, and placed a folded bill on Serena's table. A note from the restaurant manager, complaining about inappropriate seating choices near VIP service. Serena unfolded it, the paper crisp and cold, and read the words that were more than a complaint. They were a verdict, a sentence delivered by people who had never known hunger, only hunger for control. Leon saw her face darken, the mask of composure cracking just enough to reveal the storm beneath. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. The first sign that he understood power wasn't just in the boardroom. "Nothing," Serena lied, her voice sharp as broken glass, the kind of lie she had perfected over years of corporate warfare. But this time, the lie tasted like poison. Noah noticed too, his child's intuition cutting through the tension like a knife. "Dad, is the restaurant in trouble?" he asked, his voice small but clear, and Leon smiled only for him. "Not trouble," Leon said, his eyes flicking over the room like a radar scanning for threats. "Just expensive people being loud." Mia laughed at that. A bright, unguarded sound that made Serena's chest tighten, and then she clapped a hand over her mouth, as if she'd just realized she'd done something forbidden. Serena should have stayed silent, should have let the moment pass like all the others. But the weight of the note, the waiter's glare, the children's hope, it was too much to bear. She stood, her black dress whispering against the marble as she turned to the waiter, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Bring the children their desserts. Charge it to my account." The waiter hesitated, his polished shoes shifting on the marble. But one glance at Serena's face told him there would be no argument. Not tonight, not when the room was already holding its breath. A few guests turned to watch, one already reaching for a phone, the flash of a camera like a spark in dry tinder. And Serena knew the moment would be dissected, spun, used against her. Before the desserts arrived, Serena's chest tightened, a vice clamping around her lungs, and the room tilted like a ship caught in a storm. Wine glasses seemed to drift away from her, their edges blurring into golden streaks, and she gripped the table, her knuckles white beneath the weight of control she had spent a lifetime building. Mia's voice reached her from far away, small and alarmed. "Mom?" And Serena tried to answer, but her throat had forgotten how to form words. The waiter stepped back, his face draining of color, and Serena's pulse roared in her ears like a freight train, a sound so loud it drowned out everything else. She knew enough to recognize the symptoms: stress, exhaustion, the body's rebellion against the demands of empire. But she did not know that Leon understood it faster. He was already beside her, his presence a solid wall against the chaos, and the single word he spoke cut through the noise like a scalpel. "Sit down." Not to the room, not to the waiter, to her. That one word did what no one else's concern had ever done. It reached the part of her that still remembered how to breathe. Leon checked her wrist, his fingers cool and steady, then her breathing, then the color in her face, assessing the damage with the precision of a man who had once saved lives for a living. "Did you skip lunch?" he asked, his voice matter-of-fact, as if this were a routine checkup, not a crisis unfolding in the middle of Bellamy's. Serena nodded once, humiliation burning her cheeks like a brand, the truth too raw to voice. Yes, she had skipped lunch, skipped dinner, skipped the childhood she had traded for a boardroom. "Any medications?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers, and Serena pointed weakly at the table, where her purse sat like a fortress of forgotten pills. He took the glass of water, added sugar from the condiment tray with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times, and made her drink slowly, the liquid sweet and thick on her tongue. The waiter stared, his jaw slack, a man who had spent his life judging others by their clothes, not their competence, and muttered something about, "How does he know that?" Leon ignored him, his focus absolute. A man who had learned the hard way that the world doesn't care about your title when your pulse is racing and your vision is fading. The dizziness passed in waves, each one weaker than the last, and when Serena could finally speak, her voice was thin, a ghost of the authority she had spent years cultivating. "How did you know what to do?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for an explanation, for a reason why this stranger had seen her when no one else had. Leon looked down at Noah, who was watching with wide, curious eyes, then back at her and said, "Because I used to do this for a living." Serena blinked, the words hanging in the air like a confession, and asked, "Do what?" "Emergency response. Trauma support. Long time ago," he said, his voice rough but steady, the kind of confession that doesn't need drama to land with weight. The restaurant around them seemed to shrink, the crystal chandeliers dimming into a blur of gold, and Serena felt the room tilt again. Not from dizziness, but from the realization that this man had just seen her at her weakest. Mia stared at him with open interest now, like she had just discovered a secret door in the wall of her mother's polished life. And Noah squeezed his father's sleeve, sensing the shift in the air. Leon's jaw tightened, as if he had not meant to say any of it, but the words were out, and Serena heard the depth of them, the grief and the guilt buried beneath the surface. Serena led Leon and the children to a quieter private room at the back of the restaurant, away from the judging eyes and the whispering mouths, where the silence felt like a luxury she didn't deserve. The private room was dim, the lighting soft and golden, the kind of place where secrets were kept and power was negotiated in hushed tones. But tonight it held something else, something fragile and real. Leon didn't ask for anything, Didn't demand explanations or apologies, just made sure Noah had water and that Mia was no longer bored, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. The children built a tower out of sugar packets, their laughter bright and unguarded, and when it collapsed they dissolved into giggles, the sound so pure it made Serena's chest ache. When the room finally settled, the weight of the night pressing down on her like a physical force, Serena asked the question she had been avoiding since the moment she met Leon's eyes. "Why aren't you still doing that job?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The kind of question that demands an answer you're not sure you want to hear. Leon stared at the table for a long moment, his hands resting still, as if movement might break him open, and then he spoke, his voice low and even, the kind of truth that doesn't need embellishment. "Because my wife died when I couldn't get home in time," he said. The words simple but devastating, a wound laid bare without the bandages of time or therapy. He said it without drama, without the kind of performance that turns grief into spectacle. And that made it worse, the raw honesty of a man who had long since stopped performing for anyone. She had complications after Noah was born. "I was on a call out 3 towns over," he continued, his voice steady but his hands trembling just slightly, the only sign of the storm inside. "By the time I got there, she was gone," he finished. And the silence that followed was so heavy it could have crushed the sugar packet tower. Mia stopped playing, her eyes wide and serious, and Noah looked at his father like he already knew this story hurt, his small hand clutching Leon's sleeve like an anchor. Leon's hand rested on the table, still and quiet, as if movement might unleash something he couldn't contain, and Serena felt the weight of his grief like a physical presence in the room. Serena had no elegant response for that, no words that could soften the blow or offer comfort, because no words existed that could undo the past. She thought of all the times she had chosen work over dinner, meetings over bedtime stories, damage control over presence, the boardroom battles, the media wars, the empire she had built on sacrifice. Her beautiful face tightened with guilt, the realization hitting her like a freight train. Her daughter had just chosen a stranger's kindness over the polished power she had spent a lifetime cultivating. That realization sat heavily in her chest, a boulder she couldn't lift. And then her phone buzzed against the table, the vibration sharp and insistent, like a summons from the world she had tried to escape. One message from her chief of staff. "Board emergency. Leak confirmed. They are moving against you tonight." Serena went cold, the words like a blade twisting in her ribs, the exact kind of crisis she had feared, the kind that could unravel everything she had built in an instant. And the only person in the room who had already seen her at her worst, who had witnessed her collapse and her vulnerability, was Leon Carter, a man who had once saved lives for a living and now stood beside her, silent but unshaken. She explained the situation in one breath, the words tumbling out like a confession. The board faction's plan to force her out, using the narrative that she was too unstable to lead. The dinner collapse, if recorded or leaked, could be used as proof, the final nail in the coffin of her reputation, and Serena felt the weight of it like a noose tightening around her neck. Leon listened, his eyes narrowed not with judgment but with focus, as if he were dissecting the problem like one of his old trauma cases, searching for the pattern beneath the chaos. He asked 3 short questions, each one precise and cutting. Who leaked the schedule? Who benefits? Who had access to your assistant? Serena answered each one, her voice steady despite the storm inside. And by the third answer, Leon's expression shifted, his mind already seeing the connections she had missed. "Your deputy chair set you up," he said, his voice flat but sure, the kind of statement that doesn't need evidence to feel true. Serena frowned, her mind rebelling against the idea, but the weight of Leon's words pressed down on her like a truth she couldn't ignore. "That's impossible." "Not impossible," Leon corrected, his voice calm but firm. "Convenient." He leaned back in his chair, thinking like the emergency specialist he had once been, his mind dissecting the timeline with the precision of a surgeon. "The leak and the stress event were too close," he said, his voice low and measured, the kind of analysis that made Serena's legal team's work look amateurish in comparison. Somebody wanted a public weakness. They needed a public collapse, he continued, and Serena felt the room shrink around her, the air thick with the weight of his words. Mia looked between them, her eyes wide with wonder, and said, "Mom, he's like one of those people in movies who knows everything." Leon gave a faint smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Only when somebody's life is falling apart." Serena made a choice, her fingers trembling slightly, as she opened the call from her chief of staff on speaker, the board already in motion, the coup already underway. She stood, straightened her dress, and let her voice return to the tone that had built her company. The voice of a woman who had never known defeat, but tonight it sounded hollow. Then Leon stopped her, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Don't fight them like a CEO." Serena looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest, and he met her gaze with a clarity that made her breath catch. "Fight them like a mother," he said, and the words landed in the room like a bell, simple and true and impossible to ignore. Serena's face changed, not into softness but into clarity, the kind of understanding that rewires a person's soul, and she knew at once what he meant. The board wanted weakness. They were going to get resolve. The next morning, Serena walked into the emergency board meeting with Leon beside her, not as an employee or a witness, but as the man who had seen exactly who she was when the mask fell. Mia stayed with Noah in the lounge outside, both children drawing on napkins with crayons, the paper filled with cartoon characters and abstract shapes, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension inside. The deputy chair began with polished concern, his tailored suit and practiced frown a mask of sympathy, but the room held its breath, waiting for the trap to spring. Then the video footage appeared on the screen, a recording of Serena's collapse at Bellamy's, the moment she had become the very weakness her board claimed she was. The room shifted, the air thick with anticipation, and Leon stood before anyone could speak, his presence a quiet storm gathering force. He did not raise his voice. He broke the footage apart sentence by sentence, timing by timing, his analysis precise and devastating. He showed how the leak had been staged, how the board memo had circulated before the restaurant incident, how the assistant's call log lined up with the deputy chair's office like a smoking gun. The pattern was plain once he pointed at it, the kind of obvious truth that only becomes visible when someone brave enough names it. When the board pushed back, Leon gave them one short line, his voice calm but unyielding. "You wanted proof she couldn't lead. Instead, you proved you couldn't wait." No one spoke after that, not because it was theatrical, but because it was true, the kind of truth that silences even the most polished liars. The deputy chair tried to deny it, his voice cracking under the weight of evidence, but Serena cut him off, her voice steady now. The voice of a woman who had just discovered her power wasn't in control, but in clarity. "You used my daughter's dinner and my body to stage a coup," she said, the words sharp and unflinching, and the room went dead silent. Then one director stood, then another. The dominoes began to fall, the plan collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. By the end of the hour, the deputy chair was removed pending investigation. Serena kept her seat, and the room itself felt different, as if the air had been cleansed of something toxic. Afterward, one of the older directors asked Leon who he was, his voice curious but cautious, as if he sensed there was more to this man than met the eye. Serena answered before Leon could speak, her voice soft but firm. "He's the man who saved my life before the board did." Leon looked away, uncomfortable with praise, his jaw tightening as if the words were a burden he didn't deserve. But the truth of them hung in the air, undeniable. Mia and Noah ran in just as the meeting ended, their arms outstretched, Mia hugging her mother first, then reaching for Leon's hand, her voice bright with wonder. "See," she said, her eyes shining with a child's unfiltered truth. "He talks to him like he matters." Leon swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion, and Noah grinned like he understood the full shape of the day, even if he didn't have the words for it, his scuffed sneakers scuffing against the floor. 3 months later, Serena no longer led from behind glass. Her office transformed into something new. A family support center where employees could bring their children, where nap rooms and play areas replaced the cold sterility of corporate power. The executive floor was cut in half, one wing repurposed for families forced to choose between power and presence, the walls painted warm colors, the air filled with laughter instead of silence. Leon became head of emergency response training for the company's public sites, but only on a schedule that let him eat dinner with Noah, refusing to be turned into a corporate symbol or a trophy of Serena's victory. Serena respected that. It was new for her, this respect for boundaries, for the quiet strength of a man who didn't need to perform for anyone. Mia and Noah became inseparable, their bond forged in the crucible of that single dinner at Bellamy's, where they had learned that kindness didn't have a price tag. They built paper cities on the restaurant table, now reserved every Friday night, the one with no press, no cameras, just family, the kind of stability that money couldn't buy. Serena noticed something else, something she hadn't realized was missing until it returned. Mia laughed more, not in bursts or giggles, but in full, unguarded sentences, the kind of laughter that said a child felt safe enough to be herself. She had not realized how rare that had been until it came back, and the realization made her chest tighten with grief for the childhood she had missed, and gratitude for the one she was reclaiming. Leon, for his part, stopped speaking about the past as if it were a locked room, the grief over his wife still there, but no longer the sole occupant of his heart. Sometimes, when the children were asleep, he and Serena sat on the terrace with coffee, the steam curling into the night air, and said almost nothing. It was enough. More than enough. It was calm. a word Serena had never associated with power before, but now understood. One evening, months later, Serena watched Mia help Noah tie his shoe outside the restaurant, the city moving around them like a living thing, indifferent to their small circle of stability. Leon came to stand beside her, his presence a quiet reassurance, and for a long time neither of them spoke, the silence between them comfortable and full. Then Serena said, "I thought leadership meant never falling apart." Her voice soft but steady, the kind of admission that comes from a place of hard-won wisdom. Leon shook his head, his eyes reflecting the golden glow of the restaurant lights behind them, and said, "No. It means knowing who to call when you do." She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes, the kind of smile that hadn't existed in her life before Leon Carter walked into it and changed everything. The restaurant lights glowed behind the glass, warm and golden, casting the night in a hue that felt like a promise, like a new beginning. Mia looked back and waved both arms at once, her designer sneakers flashing in the light, and Noah copied her, his scuffed shoes scuffing against the pavement. Serena raised her hand, and Leon did too, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment, a touch that held the weight of everything they had been through and everything they had become. It was such a small thing, just four people waving under city light, but it held everything. The past, the present, the future, and the quiet, unshakable truth that sometimes the greatest power isn't in control but in connection.